on me. Well, when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. Yes, I will. I'll help you carry on. For it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on.
One of the most beautiful gifts humankind has been blessed with is, in my opinion, our ability to form connections with each other. It has been said time and time again that life in of itself is a gift, but there are times when it gets strange and complicated that it feels more like a curse than anything else really, because by virtue of existing, we're prone to experiencing both the highs and lows of life. And just like the highs, the lows can get really low, because sometimes life just throws you off track and you're left wondering about trying to find your way back to sanity, and sometimes it all just gets a little too heavy to bear. But in the midst of the whirls of life, we're able to unburden ourselves of the many emotions that weigh on our hearts by sharing our troubles and sorrows with an understanding friend or brother. At times it feels like our lives are crumbling at our feet and the weight of our troubles is closing in on us, leaving us feeling isolated and scared. But by opening up and allowing a trusted individual to see into the mess of our lives, we're relieved after hearing a voice that's not our own tell us that everything is going to be okay. And other times, we're fortunate enough to find parts of ourselves in other people as they find parts of themselves in us, the wonderful gift of relatability. In these moments, we discover that we're actually not alone, and we're comforted by this realization because having another person understand exactly how you feel makes you feel validated. And it is this validation that brings us down to a sense of serenity. At times we find ourselves in denial, but deep down within, we know that we don't just yearn for connection, but true, genuine connection. The kind in which we feel completely comfortable being our true selves with other people, and the kind in which others feel safe enough to be their true selves with us. Connection that is rooted in vulnerability. And it's a form of magic in its own way, really, how we meet strangers in our lives and go on to create bonds in places where there once was nothing. But as beautiful a gift as it is, the act of being vulnerable is just not the easiest thing to engage in, because we're usually clouded with emotions that stop us from opening ourselves up to others, with the biggest emotional blockage being fear. In the midst of mental cloudedness and emotional turmoil, we're compelled by our need for comfort and relief to find someone, a trusted friend, brother or sister that we can run to and vent to and just let it all out, but we tend to stop dead in our tracks out of fear. Fear that manifests itself in different ways for different people, but fear nonetheless. We're scared of being misunderstood, not taken seriously, or having our emotions invalidated and being labeled off as attention seekers or too emotional and too sensitive. Fear of being a burden and an inconvenience to someone because weren't you venting to this same person the other day? God, they must be tired of your baggage. Fear of having other people see your imperfections and insecurities, the parts of you that are deemed as being not so pretty or lovely, because what if I get judged and looked down on? And when you do get to open yourself up, the exposure fills you with immediate regret. You feel sick to your stomach and wish you hadn't done so. Because to be vulnerable is to open yourself up for potential criticism and to let others see into your inner world, exposing yourself and allowing the uncertainty of other people's opinions of how they perceive you to take over. Sometimes we fall in love with the idea of being an enigma and we fear bursting the facade of a perfect life and the misconception that some people may have about us. Misconceptions like the belief that we have our lives all figured out and we know exactly what we're doing. And we fear because in reality we really don't know where we're going or what we're doing, but others knowing this about us would leave us feeling weak and at a loss. Fear of falling off of the pedestal we've placed ourselves on and the ones others have placed us on, pedestals that paint images of us that we pride ourselves in. Because being vulnerable with other people lets them see that you don't really have your shit together, a cut through the ego. And fear because we live in a cruel world filled with manipulators and people with malicious intent that take pleasure in seeing other people suffer. We fear having our insecurities used against us and people we share personal elements of our lives and identity with taking advantage of us. The inability to figure out who to trust and turn to when we feel heavy inside. It's these little fears experienced from time to time that pile up and push us to close ourselves off from the world. For the longest time of my life, I have been a very sensitive little bird, emotionally soft and fragile. I would get easily hurt by the smallest of things, like a person whose approval I cared about but shouldn't, showing even the slightest bit of dislike for me or my presence. Sometimes it would feel like being intimidated by an individual that has a resting bitch face, and out of my people-pleasing tendencies, feeling the utmost need to impress them or get them to like me, regardless of the fact that I barely even know this person, and neither do they know me. And other times it would feel like crumbling at the encounter of the slightest bit of criticism, because it feels like an attack, the curse of taking things personal, like getting anxious and mistaking a lack of response from a person as them being mad at me or straight up disliking me. And then there's the urge to hide under a rock after a failed attempt to connect with a person, feeling stupid and cowering in shame, pleading to the self to never make such attempts ever again. This was the beginning of my fear of vulnerability and the growth of a deep-rooted need to disconnect from everyone and everything. Because it becomes exhausting, being trapped in the cycle of connecting with people and everything falling apart, leaving you with the emotionally draining task of picking up the pieces and healing. Like hopelessness, because what's the point when it all just ends up hurting so much in the end? Like a betrayal experienced one too many times, a distrust for individuals and a paranoia enough to drive you crazy and leave you lonely. Disconnecting out of shame because of past experiences where people judged us or made us feel small and insignificant for being who we really are. When you've been hurt a couple of times and are usually the one left behind, the act of connecting and being vulnerable with other people becomes quite bitter. Somewhere along the way, it becomes easier to just convince yourself that avoiding all manner of emotional connection with people is the best way to go about living. That it's less stressful and inconveniencing and overall an easier way of going about your day-to-day existence. In the constant state of fear and the unwillingness to be touchable and reachable, we end up building high walls of detachment and a need to be self-reliant, having concluded that nothing good ever comes out of being vulnerable, all in an attempt to run away from all manner of pain whatsoever. But somewhere deep within us is a longing for a sense of community and reliance on other people. We yearn for a kind of happiness that comes as a result of being loved and wanted, appreciated even. So we reach out again and try our luck at this whole human connections thing. Oh, but it isn't long before something triggers you heightened sensitivity, causing you to close yourself up again. An internal conflict is formed within us as our human nature wars with our fears, however big they may seem, because ultimately, human beings are social creatures, and no man is an island. Lucky are those who don't take to heart the mishaps of our human nature, because to some, like I, paranoia gets the best of us and we end up growing a distaste for the disingenuous nature of the connections we see around us. The pathetic friendships and relationships people get stuck in out of fear of being alone, even when the said ships are rooted in dishonesty, gossip, and pretentiousness. The paranoia seeps through your skin and gets to your heart. Next thing you know, you're worrying about whether the people within your circle secretly hate you or talk bad behind your back. It's a disease, really, and it drives you to isolation and shame. But then it gets better. Or not quite better, but you forget. You forget about all the bad that comes with human interactions and find yourself enjoying the warmth of a friend's embrace and how good it feels to have a group of friends to hang out with, until again someone within your circle does something that pokes at your emotional wounds and pushes you back in that state of paranoia, and you feel like disconnecting yourself and cutting everyone off. Before you know it, you're trapped in a constant cycle of war between your desire for human connection and the fear of it. A fear that turns into frustration, because why does it have to be so difficult? Why can't it just be easy and straightforward? Why can't I seem to find true, genuine connection? But what is true, genuine connection? Because ultimately, letting people in and allowing them to mean something to you is giving way to the possibility of being hurt, no matter how careful we may try to be. Part of our complex nature as human beings is rooted in our flaws, imperfections that show up in a lot of areas of our lives, including our relationships with others around us. And so what I've come to learn and partially accept is that in as much as I was trying to find a connection in which things would just be easy and simple, it was very unrealistic. I kept fighting the notion that our survival and sanity is to some extent depended on some level of human interaction, because I was too scared to put up with the not so pretty sides of forming human connections. I'd find myself at emotional crossroads and I'd crave for separation from everything and everyone, because retreating into my inner shell and attempting to keep people at arm's length felt like the safer option. Because truth be told, people are always going to mess up, and not just once, but time and time again. Forming human connections is hard and messy and complicated, and sometimes it can get very tense and ugly. But as hard a pill to swallow as it is, we can't just stop experiencing things because of the bad that comes with it. Because by doing so, we're denying ourselves a chance at having the full human experience when, after all, we only live once. The meaningful connections we yearn to form with other people are rooted in vulnerability, and vulnerability can be quite unpredictable. Because true, genuine connection looks like a close friend expressing their genuine opinion that triggers you and you respecting their opinion even when you don't fully agree with them. Like living through uncomfortable and awkward moments that are sometimes inevitable. Like learning to forgive a friend that has stepped on your toes and trying to communicate your needs and hurts even when it's the hardest thing to do. Sometimes it looks like two friends trying to revive a friendship when they seem to be growing apart, like putting in effort to rekindle lost connection in spite of the fact that your efforts may or may not be met with rejection. And other times it looks like letting go. When no light has faded and the connection is dead, we're tempted to keep fighting because we're hopeful individuals. In this struggle, the sadness sets in on us until eventually we find it within us to accept this loss. And until eventually we find it within us to accept that this is what true genuine connection looks like. It's not straightforward because it can get hard and uncomfortable and I hate it. But I guess that's how life is as a whole, and fighting against this truth doesn't liberate us from the many trials it throws at us, but puts us at war with ourselves. My return to acceptance is not as a result of declaring defeat in my attempts to disconnect, because if anything, I still believe that life gets very messy when other people are involved, and it's a lot more peaceful and turbulent-free when I keep to myself. But I choose to accept because I know that by allowing my fears, shame, and insecurities to dictate how I live, I'm denying myself a life in which I open my heart up to different experiences and making the most out of it. I've always found it hard to accept that a person can be good and still hurt you in the process of connecting, even when faced with my own imperfections, because I usually choose to see the bad in people, which, when I think about it, is just a way in which I reinforce my need to disconnect. And I feel like it's going to take some time for me to shift my perspective and to not be so pessimistic, but I'd like to think that with acceptance comes some form of growth. And as for the fears, falling off a pedestal others place us on can feel like losing, but I guess we can start by taking ourselves off the same pedestal and accepting that we're just human, and sometimes we mess things up and have no idea what we're doing, and that's okay. Because by allowing ourselves to be imperfect individuals, when we find ourselves cringing and hating ourselves for being vulnerable to the wrong people in the past, we can hopefully be a little kind and forgiving to ourselves. And if out of our knowingness we end up crossing paths with individuals that hold malicious intent and they end up violating our trust and hurting us, I guess we can find a sense of hope in knowing that not only were we blessed with the gift of vulnerability, but the ability to heal from emotional pain. And ultimately, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, regardless of how much I hate that saying, and that, like Bill Withers says in his song, we all need one another in this life for proper functioning and survival, and that's just something we can't run away from, unfortunately.
Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry. I'll help you carry on. It won't be long. It won't be long. Now I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. You just call on me, brother. When you need Yo, put your hands together. Come on, wave with me. Act like you hear me. Hey! Huh. I just might have a problem that you'll understand. We all need I see that. I lean on me when you're not strong. And I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry. I help you carry on. It won't be long. So